Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remaster, released April of 2023, retailing for $17.99. Available on all modern platforms. This is of course a remaster of Final Fantasy IV, the first 16-bit Final Fantasy game. This originally came to the West, rebranded as Final Fantasy II, and the version we got back on the Super Nintendo was heavily cut down. It was much easier than its Japanese counterpart, and nearly all of the characters were missing various commands in battle. These issues were corrected in various ports over the years, including this one, thankfully. So the game starts out in what could be charitably called a cutscene. You are Cecil, a Dark Knight, commander of a fleet of airships. You're going to a town of mages to steal their crystal. Having accomplished their mission, both Cecil and the men under his command feel morally conflicted about what they've been doing. Once back home, Cecil takes his objections to the king and is punished for it. And that's when the game proper actually starts. You're going to deliver a ring to a little village up north. And you're not alone. You have your good friend Kane, the Dragoon, with you. And even at this early point, you'll notice that there's an attempt made to make each character unique in combat. Both can simply attack and use items, but Cecil can sacrifice some hit points to attack everything on screen. Very useful if you're going to grind. Kane, on the other hand, has the ability to jump. An attack that only hits one enemy, but hits them a bit harder than a standard attack, but does take longer to happen. Very useful for bosses. Once you actually deliver the ring, you'll see two things that this game is famous for. First, that pretty much terrible things follow Cecil everywhere he goes, and that characters leave and join your party constantly. Because after this point, Kane is gone, at least for now, but you now have Rydia with you. A summoner who at this point in the game can use both white and black magic, and throughout the game characters are going to be coming and going. And unfortunately, not all characters are created equal. In this instance, you're actually trading up, but there are times later in the game where that simply will not be the case. Like when you lose a caster to get a bard in his place. Or basically any time Yang leaves your party. But while this coming and going of characters can be somewhat annoying, it's also somewhat freeing. You never need to worry about what party you're going to have, because the game is going to decide for you exactly what party you will have. And you don't get a say in it. This also means you don't need to worry about which characters you're using and not using, because your only option is to use and level the characters you have with you at this given moment. And I do think that the coming and going of characters was meant to serve the story, which was a fairly good story for a video game back in 1991. But at this point, the medium has definitely moved on, and at this point the story comes across as a little quaint, at least compared to more modern games in the genre. And because of this, there are some elements that are a bit hard to justify. Like a character that repeatedly betrays your party, but keeps getting more chances, which they're meant to have been longtime friends, but there still has to be a limit somewhere for this type of behavior. Also, mostly fairly late in the game, there is optional content to do, if you're so inclined. For example, there are several optional summons to get. Because of how characters are coming and going, even towards the end of the game, it's hard to know when is the best time to actually go for these optional things. When is your party actually best suited to do these things? Because the final party you have in the game is not actually great for getting those summons or some of the other things you can do. And without knowing what's to come, it's rather difficult to plan these things out. It's also a little difficult to keep suspending disbelief, as throughout the game, Cecil and whatever friends he has with them perpetually fail at virtually every turn, but the villains never choose to just finish them off. Repeatedly, they fail to protect a crystal, the villains come, take it, and then basically run off with a "I'll get you next time" gadget. And there's also Cecil's growth as a character. In the early parts of the game, he's trying to come to terms with that he's done many people great harm, and this comes to a head when he goes back to the City of Mages from the intro, where essentially the entire town hates him. And at this point, the town tells him that he needs to go to Mount Ordeals and give up his dark power. And he goes from being a Dark Knight to being a Paladin, which makes him lose the Darkness attack, which is so useful, and it's instead replaced with not very good white magic. But when he comes back having done this, everyone in the town instantly forgives him for what he's done. And Cecil apparently completely stops feeling bad about any of it either. So basically, to forgive himself for committing mass slaughter, possibly genocide, all it took was a costume change. And not only does he forgive himself and stop growing as a character, everyone else seems to be on board with that plan too. Also, throughout the story, multiple characters sacrifice themselves in some way, which makes for an emotional beat in the story, which is then completely ruined when you find out they're actually perfectly fine. And it's more annoying as these characters don't rejoin you or anything when you find them, so the emotional weight of their sacrifice is completely undone for absolutely no reason. So is Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remaster worth your time and money? Well, it's less than $20 for a game that would have cost you $60 back on the Super Nintendo, or $40 on the Game Boy Advance or PSP, and while yes, it is missing some content from the GBA, and especially the PSP release, this is still a great baseline version of the game that is infinitely more accessible than any other release of it at this point, as this is definitely superior to the American Super Nintendo version, as the difficulty has not been reduced and characters have not had their abilities taken away. In addition to that, it also has a much better translation than was seen on the Super Nintendo. It's also worth playing this particular entry because Final Fantasy IV is what finally crystallized what a lot of Final Fantasy would be going forward, as this was the first appearance of ATB in combat. That's the little bars that fill up with actions if you're confused. It may have been nice if you'd had more say in who was in your party, but at many points the story wouldn't work without having very particular characters with you at the time. So yes, for its price of $18, Final Fantasy IV, the Pixel Remaster, is absolutely worth it. And perhaps if you enjoy it, you can go and spend the time and money to look up the PSP version of Final Fantasy IV. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.